Hello, everyone. In this podcast, we will be discussing sensitive topics such as sexual assault. It's important to take care of yourself while listening. Some suggestions are listening while you're in a healthy headspace or knowing who you can reach out to if you become upset. Our 24/7 helpline for crisis calls based out of Central Florida is 407-500-HEAL. By contacting the national hotline at 1-800-656-4673, you can get support and learn about your local resources. There's always someone ready to help. Welcome to the Victim Service Center podcast. Here we sit down with professionals that serve survivors and victims of trauma or those who've experienced violence and have conversations about social issues. This week, we are talking about DBT. My name is Emilie Mitchell. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the education coordinator at the Victim Service Center of Central Florida. With me today, I have two amazing people returning who have been on the podcast before. And firstly, I have Monique Bennett. Monique uses she, her pronouns and hails from the University of Central Florida, where she earned her master's in social work and certificate in marriage and family counseling and a bachelor's in psychology. She has several years of experience working with women, children, and families, in addition to our homeless population. She is passionate about helping others overcome barriers and navigate through life's obstacles using solution-focused techniques and motivational interviewing. She is adamant about empowering others so they are living life and not just surviving. She serves her clients with eyes of compassion, a heart filled with love, by providing education, motivation, and emotional support. Monique believes you can make a difference in this world by just helping one person at a time. So Monique, thank you so much for being here today and coming back onto the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I also have returning Suzanne Higbie-Long. Suzanne uses she, her pronouns and is a counselor intern at Victim Service Center. She earned her bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Central Florida and will graduate from Rollins College with her master's in mental health counseling this May. Suzanne feels that along with an individual therapy, support groups and group therapy are important pieces in a survivor's journey. Suzanne is a strong advocate for trauma survivors and believes we need to call to action against rape culture and sexual assault in our society. So Suzanne, thank you as well for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to have this conversation with both of you. On this podcast, we have spoken about a lot of different kinds of therapeutic methods, such as art therapy, music therapy, narrative therapy, and we have even spoken on gardening being used as a therapeutic tool. Today, we will be talking specifically about DBT, which has become more and more widely used within the mental health field in recent years. In this episode, we will be defining DBT and some of its components, debunking common misconceptions about this method, chatting about the DBT group at the VSC, and going over why DBT can be a powerful tool for survivors of trauma. So with that, I'd like to start off as I usually do, which is with definitions. So what does DBT stand for? And can either of you provide a brief description of it?
I guess I'll go ahead and start. DBT is called dialectical behavior therapy, and it is actually a type of cognitive behavioral therapy. And what it does is it tries to identify and change negative thinking patterns and pushes for individuals to grow in their positive behavior changes. So it's really good, and it's very much a solution focus type of a treatment or therapy.
Solution focus being that you're focusing on kind of changing behavior specifically. Got it. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And then Suzanne, did you have anything that you wanted to jump in on as far as that definition?
Yes, so dialectical means bringing together two opposing ideas. So the goal with DBT is to help a person see things from more or different perspectives. And it focuses on a person's behavior, using that behavior to balance those two opposing ideas, and coming to an awareness and acceptance that both opposing ideas can be true at the same time. So it's really the exploration of bringing two opposing ideas.
Wow, those are such great definitions together. And thank you so much for both of you breaking that down. I know that I love that concept of two opposing things coming together, because I know that there's this concept in psychology called cognitive dissonance, which is when there are two opposing thoughts and it's hard to kind of adapt to that and accept that. So that's really cool. So with that, what makes DBT different from other forms of therapy?
It's very structured, and it's more like an academic type of therapy, because there's like a lot of skills that you're learning, and then you're applying them to the situations that you begin to learn when it comes to emotional dysregulation. So I think that's the main difference between it. Like with some of the other therapies, you're able to kind of process why this happened, or you're looking at the root cause of things. Whereas I like to look at it from my perspective of learning about DBT is almost like when you do a math problem, there's a set of steps that you can follow, which produces a result. And in some cases with the skills, there's a set of skill sets that you follow and they produce this change. Whereas you'll see as we talk a little bit more, and they talk about doing the opposite. So there's a section in DBT where it talks about doing the opposite of whatever it is you're experiencing that's negative, then doing something positive. If you're sitting, then standing and walking around. So there's a lot of more skill sets that you're going to have to learn, and then you learn to apply them to certain situations that you're experiencing or encountering.
It seems like it's like more concrete, like there's actual physical steps that you can take instead of more of that processing that you were mentioning. So with that, what was DBT actually designed for, and what is it used for today?
So the Marsha Linehan developed this technique, and it was actually created for those with borderline personality disorder. And it was shown to be very effective for individuals who have high emotional dysregulation, self-harming behaviors or self-destructive behaviors, or that were suicidal. And so the focus of the techniques helped to bring about a positive change, which is supposed to help those individuals see how to live a life worth living. That would be the goal, the commitment that they're making to improve their life. But through research, they've shown that this technique works very well with individuals that have PTSD, attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder, bipolar disorder, eating disorders, major depression disorders, obsessive compulsive disorders, and substance use disorders.
I think the emphasis is given more towards learning how to regulate your emotions with all of those disorders and issues that people struggle with, helping them to become mindful and learning to accept pain and not just push it away or avoid it. So DBT is good at helping people break rigid thinking, helps them to be kinder to themselves and not self-attack or judge themselves harshly for things that they might be struggling with. So I think, that might be a connection for all of them.
Definitely when we think about some of the disorders that we talked about, is you're able with DBT to help focus on changing negative behaviors into positives. So if you're talking about someone who has obsessive compulsive disorder, or eating disorder, in many cases you're realizing that some of the things that you're doing are not viewed as negative, and you want to change them into something more positive. So I would also look at that correlation between why this would be good, for treating those as well. So it definitely is good for treating the rigid thinking, like Suzanne was saying, because there's so many skills that we wouldn't even be able to go through in this podcast with DBT. But it's a whole system, and there's several stages that helps an individual learn to essentially, like Suzanne mentioned, you begin to acknowledge your feelings, and you're able to accept those feelings, and also focus on changing and living in the moment. So that's like the three things about DBT that is really what I enjoy about it, because it teaches you to say, okay, I recognize that I may feel this way about something, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I have to respond or react in this way that I'm used to doing.
That makes a lot of sense. It's kind of, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but the empowerment piece I can kind of start to see come out here as you're describing it, Monique and Suzanne. What actually made you interested in learning DBT?
So for me, it's I'm finishing my internship in May with VSC, and it's something I heard at VSC. It's something I've heard with other counselors in training, and honestly, learning more about it as I've been helping Monique teach the class. What I love about it are the tools you can give, like Monique said earlier, solution focused tools to help people regulate their emotions, and to also empower them to know that they're not the problem a lot of the time when it comes to overwhelming feelings. There's biology, and there's so many other factors that go into play for why they behave the way they do, that sometimes we get stuck there. And DBT really allows people to move past that and use skills and strategies to become better. So I love the growth mindset about DBT. You don't have to stay stuck in the behavior that is driving you crazy about yourself.
Absolutely. It sounds like it would be really disheartening or feel like there's no hope without something that can kind of break whatever cycle that this person might be feeling that they're in. And so I can see why you were interested in exploring it. Monique, what made you interested in DBT specifically?
Similar reason as Suzanne. Since I've been here at VSC, I know that we do the skills group, and I hadn't heard about it prior to that when I was back in school. So I was like, okay, this is new. I'd love to learn more about it. And I opted to join in doing the group. And once I decided to actually take on a couple of trainings, I enjoyed those, the distress tolerance skills. It's just hearing about the skills to help you process through things that, situations that you may have that will have you have a heightened sense of response emotionally, but then it gives you a tool to help you to kind of be able to regulate what you may be feeling emotionally, and get yourself into a place where you can kind of be able to process through it without creating a greater, or making the problem even worse. So sometimes you may have incidences, which in this treatment, we'll say certain times that you may feel like you're in a crisis because you've experienced something that has brought you to a heightened state. And you may not necessarily know how to solve that right away, but they give you these tools to kind of help you be able to calm down and regulate your emotion, so you can then go into what they'll call a wise mind and begin to ask yourself the appropriate questions so that you can respond in a manner that, is more responsible rather than based on how you emotionally feel, which in most cases with individuals who take this course or this group, may oftentimes respond out of emotion and sometimes puts a strain on their interpersonal relationships because they'll maybe say or respond and it kind of pushes people away because they don't know how to handle the emotional dysregulation in the individual. So that's one of the things I like about DBT.
Oh my gosh, I'm really excited to delve in more about these skills that you're talking about, Monique. And it sounds like it completely makes sense why you were both very interested in learning about DBT. And you were alluding to it, to the skills group. So can you tell me a little bit about the DBT skills group that you're both leading at the VSC?
Sure, I'll be glad to. I just would like to put a small disclaimer out there. We are offering a distress tolerance skills group that focus primarily on skills derived from the DBT. And we offer this to our clients here at VSC because, as you know, with those who are survivors of traumatic circumstances, it can send your life into a place where you have a lot of emotional dysregulation. And with DBT, these skills are created to help you learn to manage your distress tolerance levels. So you want to increase your ability to um, endure for a lengthy amount of time some distress, and it helps you bring those distress levels down to a place where it is manageable so that you can become more focused and be able to navigate through some of the situations or experiences that you're having. That is the primary focus of why we offer this group to those who are clients of VSC. So these skills are really good because if you have like heightened anxiety as a result of trauma, or you experience a form of depression from your trauma or stress, which are all forms of emotional dysregulations as a result of it, the skills come into a place to help our individual clients learn how to manage the symptoms that they're feeling from the trauma so that they can kind of process through those areas that they need to with the therapist, because you know we offer therapy here. So we also ask a lot of times that make sure that when you're doing the DBT skills group with us, that you must be seeing the therapist as well. We don't recommend or often do not allow you to participate in a DBT group without the therapy component.
And that therapy component, do the individuals have to be clients of VSC therapists, or are they able to join the DBT group if they are not, if they're
In
just
most in most cases, they are seeing a therapist, or they're our clients, so they're already getting the counseling component or the therapy component. But if they are with us and they're not getting the therapy services, they have to still be seeing a therapist outside.
I see. So
But they have to be a VSC client. So yeah.
Sure. So if they're working with an advocate at that time,
Mhm.
they would still be having therapy maybe outside of VSC,
Mhm.
and doing the DBT skills group, I should say, or
Yes.
they're a client in the therapy department.
Right, because remember before when we were talking about the DB skills, because it's more of an academic, like it's considered like a class. It's not necessarily where you're processing through, situations or experiences when you're doing DBT. This is really a focus on these tools that we're giving you, how to use them, when it's the appropriate time to implement the skills, and practicing the skills when you're doing the group. So when questions come up, it's important that our clients have the opportunity to explore those additional areas with the therapist because they can't do that in the group.
You're just teaching the skills aspect.
Yes.
Understood. Yeah.
So the support group part isn't necessarily a component where, you're checking in and it's just run a little bit differently. It's a psychoed group. And we really are helping people to learn how to balance things. So how do you balance over awareness with under awareness, overthinking versus underthinking, over feeling versus under feeling, and so on and so forth, overreacting and underreacting. So the behavior skills that you learn in DBT helps our group members and myself by teaching it how to, just balance those things out. So you're not so rigid and you're not on one side and it's all black and white.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I love that what everything you're saying, and it's really breaking down what exactly this group is. So it sounds like you said it's kind of like a class almost. So are there so many weeks, and then every week you're like, okay, we're going to learn this skill today? Is that kind of how it works?
Yes,
Okay.
it is. It's 12 weeks long. And we ask that you make a commitment to those 12 weeks. We understand that things happen and that something may come up spur of the moment, but we kind of don't want you to have that to be planned if you are going to take the DBT class, because like I said, it's so many skills that truthfully, you don't really want to miss the group, because you're not necessarily doing the same skill every time that you come in. And then sometimes it's a lot with a sector of skills that you're getting in 1 week. And so, for example, when we do the group right now, we start out with a mindfulness exercise so that it kind of helps you to shift your thinking and bring you focus to, okay, we're going to do DBT now. And like mindfulness is a lot of times making you aware of the moment. So you're getting to a place where you are in the present, you're acknowledging the present, you're relaxing, you're doing breathing exercises. So there's a lot of practice in doing it. And we also take turns doing it. So it's not necessarily myself and Suzanne who's doing it. It's the members who are doing it, each group as well. So in the beginning, we have them do a mindfulness exercise with the group. So they're leading that exercise in the group. And that's because it's all about practicing. With DBT, you have to practice. You need a lot of practice because it's like conditioning yourself. And we explain it a lot of times to practice the skills. Don't wait until an incident occurs where you're trying to implement the skill, because this is also like programming. It's changing the way that you think and the way that you would normally respond to situations. So you want to condition yourself, which is why we say practice a mindfulness exercise on a daily basis. Don't wait until you are stressed out to utilize them or do a mindfulness exercise, because sometimes what will happen is you're now frustrated, and then because you haven't practiced them, you don't remember exactly how to do the exercises because you hadn't been implementing them before, and that could be frustrating.
That makes, I can totally hear what you're saying, Monique. And I know that, we're working with survivors of trauma and survivors of sexual violence. So I'd like to open up the question and ask, how is DBT helpful for survivors of sexual violence specifically, or those who have gone through trauma?
So, like I said earlier, it's the dialectical thinking. And so one of the main focuses of DBT is acceptance versus change. And this idea that especially helps survivors because, to accept healing requires a person to accept themselves and everything around their trauma and their healing. And on the other hand, healing requires a person to change. And so DBT allows people, it gives them tools to flesh out for themselves. What does that really mean? How can I accept what's happened to me? And then how can I change what I need to change in order to heal and become bigger around my grief and my trauma?
And to do it in a positive way, because, with individuals who may experience like sexual trauma, a lot of times they can maybe self-blame, ask questions of like, did I deserve this? Just really ruminate and flood with a lot of negative thoughts. And that is why this is a good tool, because it helps you with the mindfulness exercises to kind of help you to stop those thoughts that may begin to flood you when you're thinking about the trauma that happened, or replaying certain things over and over again that can kind of cause them to spiral into depression at a deeper level.
It sounds
So
like it can really help with almost like this control over or giving someone kind of agency, which we know which is really, really important for survivors of sexual violence, because we know that sexual violence is about power and control. So with that, can DBT empower survivors? And have you seen this happen with your clients?
yes, and we actually had an incident where we were explaining that to one individual client because, a lot of times we know with sexual assault that power has been taken from you and it sends you into this place emotionally that has dysregulated your life to a certain extent. But by giving you these tools, and it gives you this sense of, I have a life that's worth living. I can still have joy. I can still have, all the things I desired. You're empowering the person because they're back in a place where they're making these decisions over their lives and not necessarily the trauma that they experience is not guiding their lives. Because sometimes when you experience trauma, it's so strong and ruminates with your mind that it does begin to guide your every step to a certain extent. But DBT helps you to see the positive in life, even though you've experienced something so negative. And that is how you're empowering that individual. You're not being controlled by your circumstance. You can still have joy.
You're not being defined by what happened to you.
Exactly.
That's amazing. Suzanne, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to jump in on that as far as your empowerment.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. It empowers our survivors. You've talked a little bit in previous podcasts about ACEs. ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. There's 10 of them. It includes any experience from children being sexually or physically abused, a whole host of different things happening in the household, incarcerated parents, that kind of thing. And what they're finding is that 1 out of every 6 adults have 4 or more ACEs, and females and several racial ethnic minority groups are at a greater risk for experiencing 4 or more ACEs. So why is this important? ACEs are linked to adult trauma experiences. They're linked to chronic health problems, depression, increase in STDs, all of these issues that a lot of our survivors are dealing with on a daily basis. In addition to maybe the trauma they've had in their adult life, it may be connected to childhood trauma as well. So bringing it back to DBT, DBT empowers adults how to emotionally regulate when their brains have been changed. The emotional regulation may be something they weren't taught growing up and they don't know how to do it. Telling someone to take a time out or count back to 10 because they get angry isn't necessarily helpful. So connecting it for trauma survivors and showing them that, there is biology involved with their behavior and there are reasons that they can't explain through these ACEs and that kind of thing. So being able to understand how all this plays out helps survivors, it empowers them. Teaching people how to love and care for themselves is a gift of empowerment, helping people to claim their bodies back in their minds. In mindfulness practice and DBT is a gift of empowerment. So yeah, to answer your question, DBT is empowering for people of all places in their lives.
That's wonderful. And I love how you both really explained that. That was very thorough. And I also heard you say, Suzanne, that emotional regulation might not be something that they were taught. I could even argue that that's something that we're just not taught, to be honest. It's very difficult to even begin to express in general. And so emotional regulation sounds like a really powerful tool. And with that, do you think DBT is helpful for everyone then? For example, maybe highly sensitive people. Yeah.
I was just gonna piggyback on it when you were saying about the emotions, because that is also another reason why I really love DBT. I think Suzanne would agree because we talk about it all the time about,
Yes.
we use this every day.
Yes.
These are like skills that people should know for regular everyday things with emotional regulation. Let's say you're overwhelmed at your job and work. You can take a moment, do a mindfulness exercise, relax, just to help get some regulation if you're at the extreme end, and then go back and say, okay, I'm ready to refocus now and start doing this task that's before me. Or the radical acceptance thing, which we all talk about. We're doing some radical acceptance now. It's definitely like when you're getting curveballs thrown at you, things that are bumps in the road that you weren't expecting because life is not going exactly how you want it to. But then you're going to practice radical acceptance and say, okay, this is actually what it is. It's, how can I maneuver forward? These are just basic general things that are helpful to everyone in everyday life. And that's one of the reasons why I really like DBT overall.
Absolutely. And would you even say that, we talked a lot about, emotional regulation, and we're kind of in a very emotionally heightened moment right now. So do you think that DBT would be really helpful for those who are maybe feeling overwhelmed about the pandemic, for example?
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. You got to practice a lot of radical acceptance in the pandemic because there's a lot of things that are like out of your control, and so that's kind of how it is when you're thinking about DBT and our clients, when there's things that are happening that is not necessarily something that you could have stopped that from happening. You're recognizing that this happened, and you're recognizing and acknowledging how you feel about what happened. That's one of the things that I like about DBT because it validates your feelings. So because sometimes you tend to think of things in black and white, whereas it's saying, no, it's okay to say I'm angry and I don't like what happened, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to tie it to a different place that's not appropriate. So I can say I'm upset, but I can still respond in a different manner that's more appropriate. Whereas sometimes we might tie those things together and say that because this happened, it made me feel like this, and that means I'm either worthless or I should be ashamed or I did something wrong or I'm doing something to deserve this. No, not necessarily so. So that's kind of what I like about DBT. It's like validate your feelings. I'm acknowledging how you feel, but let's think about what happened. Let's live in this moment and let's talk about what we can do to change.
I agree. And I would also add, there's a skill called check the facts. And the pandemic is a great place where when you are becoming overwhelmed and your emotions are at a higher level, checking the facts will help you come down to that optimal zone where you're not operating like Monique talked about. You're operating in your wise mind because there's a balance between the emotional brain and the factual brain. So being able to kind of bring yourself back down to, okay, what's really going on, and not allowing the emotions take over everything.
It sounds like your wise mind is kind of at this moment where you're probably centered and able to make very clear, concise choices and be able to process things a little better. Is that
it is? And so that's kind of like when we were talking about doing DBT, when you're learning the skills, practicing them kind of helps you get to this place where you begin to start to realize some things. So I can say, because you'll start to think about, am I in my emotional mind or am I in my wise mind when I'm ready to respond to something? Because when you become aware of certain things, it kind of helps you think differently about it. Because with the practice, you begin to just become more self-aware. So you really can't talk yourself through it in the beginning. It's in the doing that you'll begin to gain more understanding. So that's one of the other main points that we like to emphasize in the group with the skills.
Yeah, and as a person's environment changes, it allows you to ebb and flow with that environment, and help you regulate when the environment changes as well.
Mm-hmm.
That actually leads to my other question too, because we did talk a little bit about how maybe they weren't taught as far as emotional regulation skills when they were children or later on in their lives. How can someone's environment actually affect that even more? If you want to highlight anything else, how can someone's environment affect their emotional regulation skills?
Well, that's part of the DBT, quest, I guess, for a person is to really become, radically accept, are there things in my environment that are deregulating me? And if so, who or what are they? And what do I need to do? I first need to be aware. I first need to accept. And then what's the action plan, So I think DBT really breaks down that cause and effect for people, especially people who might be in domestic violence violent relationships, or maybe with a toxic parent or partner. It can really deregulate someone who's trying.
Absolutely. And it maybe perhaps also if someone is naturally just more sensitive, for example, do you think that if someone's like invalidating their emotions, for example, could that kind of make it even harder for them to regulate them, do you think?
Yes.
I think that's why it makes DBT a perfect tool for individuals who have those issues. So those are kind of like the things that make DBT probably a good therapy for you to participate in. If you are someone who is heightened in your sensitivity, this is great for you because it's all about teaching you how to regulate that. If you are someone who does invalidate yourself, this is good because there's techniques to teach you or to stop you from doing that. Just to change those negative behaviors into a more of a positive way of doing it.
And so with that, I do know that we talked a little bit about the effects of trauma too. So how can trauma kind of compound the way that an environment can affect their emotional regulation skills? For example, are there any kind of changes to the brain that you want to highlight in regards to emotional regulation or anything like that?
Well, I do know that through doing the mindfulness exercises, that it helps to change the way that you process. So that's why continuously practicing it helps to change the pattern of how you usually would respond to trauma. So this is why we ask them to continue to practice it a lot, because it'll become easier with time, and then it will become your new normal way of thinking. Just if that makes sense, what I'm saying.
No, it does. Yeah, no, it
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense.
I definitely think that that's why this is really good for individuals who have experienced some form of trauma. And they used to think that, it would be best to have some treatment before, but they have found that it is a good pairing to do DBT in addition to trauma treatment at the same time. That you don't necessarily have to wait in between.
Yeah, I would also add too, when someone has experienced trauma, they have the experience and then they have what they tell themselves about the experience or about themselves. And so it's not just the incident, but it's how they narrate it in their mind, how they accept or not accept, how they judge themselves. And that is one of the lasting effects of trauma that is so hard to pluck out and remove from your mind, because you have the memory of the trauma, but now you're totally destroying your own self with your thoughts and the judgments and rumination and all of that. So
but when you step into DBT and you practice the mindfulness, the components of doing that is that you're not to judge yourself. So there's a lot of talk about not judging your thoughts, not judging yourself. If you do have a thought that's outside of the practice, don't judge that you had the thought. So it teaches them a lot of that regulating, the processing that they may have, that for internalizing what has happened, the negative things that they may begin to say to themselves. It really helps to say, okay, if you recognize it at that moment, you did that, but let's stop it at that moment. And what can we do positive from that point? So it's like distracting you from doing all of the additional thoughts that tend to come behind one after another, which is why this is such a good thing for someone who is experiencing trauma, because a lot of times it's one set of thoughts that continue to roll behind the next and leads into something else, and then another thought, which ends up making the individual become emotionally overwhelmed. What would be the challenge? Oftentimes, I believe that's what I'm getting from the question about how these environments, or how can the trauma affect or be challenging for someone to do DBT, is because you definitely have to be committed to doing it. And because it's so many skills, if you're not willing to make that level of commitment to practice these techniques that we're giving you on a regular basis, then it will make it difficult for you to reduce some of the intrusive thoughts that you know that an individual experiences oftentimes when they have a traumatic event happen.
I know that we talked a little bit about some, myths around DBT, but are there any other misconceptions that you'd like to address? For example, we kind of talked about how you're using skills, you're not actually really processing emotions. When we think of things like therapy, I think that's kind of what we think of. But I wanted to ask if there were any other misconceptions you wanted to address about DBT, or maybe some things that you had previously thought about DBT and then you started learning more about it and you're like, oh no, it's actually more like this.
A lot of things that you may hear or see frowned upon is when we talk about the mindfulness exercises, because a lot of times they're like meditation. And so individuals may be like, oh, like that's meditation. Meditation doesn't work. Like, I don't see how it's going to be beneficial. But if you really like commit yourself to it, I know from my own experience of taking the time to really focus on the body scans or doing the breathing exercises, you will see that they do offer that sense of relaxation that you may not have noticed in the past if you're opposed to doing it. So it does have a lot to do with being committed to doing it too, to be open to see and have an expectation that you'll experience some form of change. You don't want to be resistant to DBT. So that makes it difficult for you to see the results. That would be one of the main things that we often hear people make eyes about when you say, let's try mindfulness exercises.
Even though it's really a popular thing, but yeah, no, I totally get it. It can be a turn off for some people.
Yeah, because you're just breathing in and out. The shock of their face when we talk about putting your face in ice water,
my favorite.
Like, that's the extreme. Who wants to put their face in ice water? But it is known, it is proven to biologically change the chemistry of your body, which causes you to calm down.
Mm-hmm. Along with extreme exercise. Nobody wants to do extreme exercise. Get that energy out.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have these like ideas that just sounds absurd, but they work, know, and I think it's so interesting because we've had a lot of clients like, you could see their faces when you're talking about it, but then they come back and be like, I did it. I did the ice and it did work. It's just great to hear them share that they did this thing and that it did work and it was good for them, and that they did the next distress tolerance skill for the exercise, because they'll tell you like to either do jumping jacks really quick, like extreme exercise for a certain amount of minutes, so it kind of helps you to have to regulate through chemistry. So there's a couple of things that you can do that produce these results. And that's what I love about it. It's not just one component. They got quite a few tools for you to pull out and to help you get these results that you're looking for.
I like to call DBT as like, it's the nitty gritty therapy. Like if you think you're going to show up and just talk and just, feel a little better when you leave, like I feel like that's not going to be the experience a lot of the times, because it's very much like a coach. You're going to practice the skills, you're going to be held accountable for how you practice the skills.
Yes.
And and so there's a nitty grittiness to it about, we got to get down and dirty before you're going to get better. And understanding comes in the doing. You can't try to wrap your brain around, if mindfulness is not something that you're used to doing, you just have to do it, and then you'll understand later why it works. And yeah.
It's so funny that she said that, because I was thinking about how would I really help somebody get an idea of DBT in comparison to something in life. And I was like, it's like a diet. People talk about it going on a diet, but we all know to see the results that you want, you really can't go on a diet. It's a lot, it's a change. So you actually have to change the way you think. You have to be willing to commit to doing those things consistently to produce that weight loss result that you're looking for. That's how DBT is. Some of us wish we could get up and just like, we're going to lose this weight because it's going to happen, because I don't want to eat that, or it's just going to be a miracle. No, you have to put in the work. It's not going to happen overnight. We want you to just keep doing it, and gradually you'll begin to see these results because you're dedicated to doing it. So you're committed to doing the exercise, you're committed to the food change, and so also you're committed to processing how you see food in a different way, whether that's reading something that helps you learn about your health and what foods are healthy for you and why these foods are not, which is why we asked you to have the component of therapy. So we're giving you like some tools, but at the same time, you will get the opportunity to process, but you're going to process that with your therapist that you have. So there's going to be questions that will arise, and there will be questions that will arise when they're going through some of the skills. And that's where we say, okay, write that down, journal that out, and then talk about that more with your therapist.
Got it. It sounds like there might be some kind of homework assignments involved too.
Yes, it's a
Okay.
lot, because there's diary questions which are about the skills, and it kind of helps them process, where it's asking them like, what are the pros and the cons of this? What do you feel that are going to be your challenges in doing this? It really helps you to become more self-aware, because you're now assessing what are the things that may prevent me from being committed to doing this. But in doing that, you're able to then look at what you wrote down and figure out how can I change that. So you're always practicing that thing of looking at what the situation is, accepting that this is my problem right here, but what can I do to produce the result that I'm looking for? Same thing, always something with acceptance and change. Acceptance and change.
I love
That's
that.
why I love it.
I know that we've been hinting a lot at different skills. So I'd like to kind of dive more into what those are. So you've been saying things like distress tolerance skills. So what exactly are those, and when do people use what kind of skill?
I'll start and then you can finish up for me, Monique. So distress tolerance, you're learning how to distract yourself, how to self-soothe, and then how to improve the moment. And distress tolerance is when you're probably up the most and you have to bring yourself down, or vice versa, but mainly if you're in that fight or flight kind of distress. And so there's, self-soothing techniques. There's skills for improving the moment. You want to go in a little more into that, Monique?
Well, with the distress tolerance skills, it's often described as when the individual is in what they consider a crisis moment. So that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like your emotions are getting ready to go out of control.
Mm-hmm.
So you would use distress tolerance to help you kind of be able to get more calm, so that you can be in your wise mind and not in your emotional mind when you're responding to the rest of that situation. And also in these types of situations where you would implement a distress tolerance skill, the solution may not be something that is immediate. it may be something that it's going to take time for you to receive the result that you need. So this hence why it's really good for individuals who experience trauma, because we know with trauma comes, some time to process through some of those things. And so using these tools can help them to remain calm and not experience the heightened levels of anxiety, so that they can function and be able to go to work and interact with their families and not seclude themselves. Because now they've got these tools to kind of help them be able to remain calm.
I look at it as they need to distract themselves for the moment so that they can go back and then be in their wise mind to deal with the moment. It's not avoiding, it's distracting from that like Monique was saying, the crisis situation right then.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. I've heard in the past that, sometimes people are more easily able to process and face things that they may have gone through if they're feeling safe. And it sounds like this is a way that they can at least go about their day-to-day in general using these skills, and then pairing it with that moment where you are more relaxed, more in your wise mind, so that you can, or your wise brain, I should say, so that you can actually process those things and move forward, however that looks to whoever, may be listening. I know that you also talked a lot about radical acceptance. So what exactly is radical acceptance?
Radical acceptance is when you stop fighting reality and you stop responding with impulsive behaviors or destructive behaviors because things are not going how you want them to. And it's teaching you how to let go of, that hurt and the pain, the bitterness that may be helping you stay trapped in this cycle. Because a lot of times you'll hear them talking about when you are doing the flooding and the ruminating thoughts, that is bringing on the level of anxiety, it's considered to be suffering. Like you're putting yourself through this form of suffering. And when you're doing radical acceptance, it's you letting go of all of that and saying, okay, this happened. I don't like what happened. I'm very angry about what happened. And then moving into that place of how to change. So you're going to be validating your emotions.
Yeah, the phrase that we use often in class is "it is what it is." So, whatever it is, accepting it is where the radical part comes into play. It needs to be all the way, completely, in your mind, heart, and body. So everywhere, not just your mind or not just your heart. And, accepting that everything has a cause and effect. We also talk about how not everything has a reason. Often we tell people, and people who suffer from trauma, that, well, there must be some reason, or, you just don't know it. But sometimes bad things just happen. And to try to have people reason it out isn't helpful, because it just adds to how they internalize the negative situation as however they do, if they feel like they're the bad person or they're the reason. So accepting the cause and just stopping there, I think, is important too with radical acceptance.
And how is this because you talked a lot about how you're validating emotions. Do you ever find that it's hard to balance this idea of validating emotions while also wanting to regulate them, while also wanting to change them? Do you, possibly, do clients ever feel like shame that they might are being like too sensitive or something like that, or maybe they're overreacting as they try and regulate their emotions? And if they do have those feelings, how do you kind of balance that?
By saying to them that you don't want to judge those feelings, because you may be someone who is more sensitive, if that's your build or your nature. Because we talked about, like, some of these things are maybe biological, genetics, experiences that have caused you to be someone who is more sensitive. But that doesn't necessarily mean or equate to you not being worthy or being someone who's worthless. You don't have to feel some form of shame because of the way you respond to the situations that take place. It is knowing what is your way to cope or process through that. That's kind of, what I like with DBT, is because it's saying, okay, yes, I may be sensitive, I may be highly sensitive, but here's the way that I can respond to this situation that doesn't necessarily cause me to have a impulsive or negative response to my hypersensitivity.
Yeah, and it makes the natural pain feel more manageable when you take the judgment and the shame out of it, and you
Hmm.
just radically accept what's happened. So it just, the experience is more manageable for a person.
That makes a complete sense. And we know that shame is something that survivors of trauma can feel a lot of. And so that's why I really wanted to kind of break that down a little bit, because I find that really important to acknowledge. With that, what are some challenges that you face when teaching DBT skills to clients? I have heard that radical acceptance could be one difficult challenge sometimes for
Hmm.
for clients, or for ourselves, as I see Suzanne waving. But yeah, are there any other challenges that you face when teaching DBT?
I'll go first. I think one of the biggest challenges with my experience in the class and with clients is watching clients get in the way of themselves. You just have to do the DBT skills and refrain from analyzing the process. We said earlier, understanding comes in the doing. So when we work with resistant clients or clients who avoid feelings, it's a challenge, and they won't really let us help them because they're in their own way. By this, I mean these clients will overthink the process. They'll give up before doing the skills. They'll halfway do a skill. They'll judge themselves harshly through the whole process. They resist from feedback or mindfulness practices. So these clients a lot of times always have an excuse for why a skill isn't working. And sadly, the only person they're hurting is themselves. And it's really difficult to bear witness to that when they get in their own way. That's probably hands down one of my hardest things to watch.
Is there ever a time where you think that a client might not be ready then for DBT, or
Oh,
okay?
yeah, absolutely. Because like we were saying in the beginning, that we talk a lot when screening for the class about the commitment level, because you have to say, like, I'm going to be committed to utilizing these skills, because even in hearing Suzanne talk about the challenges that you may hear, there's a skill for every one of the challenges that they're necessarily experiencing, whether that is being judging of yourself, when there's a skill that teaches you about not judging yourself. So that's kind of why we say, you got to practice the skill. You have to do it because it'll help you to reduce some of these very things that are keeping you from being able to progress through the course.
Understood. And are there any other challenges that you wanted to bring up, Monique, or you, Suzanne, or was that kind of the main one?
Yeah, that's pretty much the main one, because you won't know that DBT works unless you use the skills. It's the only way
Good.
you're gonna know that it works or it doesn't. You can keep thinking that it may not work, but that doesn't necessarily mean it didn't. If you don't use the skill, how do you know they don't work?
With that, what have you personally learned from studying DBT?
I have tools. It's helped me to increase my growth mindset when I'm getting in my feelings. I'm able to get processed, work the skills, and do what I need to do to get back into my wise mind. It helps me to regulate a very stressful life as a single parent, surviving in a pandemic with teenagers and a baby, and being a grad. There's so many tools. It gives me a game plan. I feel empowered through the game plan. And it also it helps me to help my clients with everyday and sometimes bigger problems. and distress.
I feel like I'm learning so much just I want to like read up more on DBT and start implementing some of these skills.
Definitely. I mean, because once you're using them, you're just like, okay, you just start pulling out the ones you know and actually utilizing them when situations arise, because they, like Suzanne says, you have ways to keep you in your wise mind. And then you also start to recognize when you're not in that place anymore and where your emotions are starting to guide you. And then you'll take that step back, because in one of the distress tolerance skills, they have that the skill stop, where it's like stop, take a breath, observe. And these are things that you may hear people say, I need a moment. That's kind of what it sounds like. I need a moment. But if you become aware of the skills, you find yourself like doing that. If you feel overwhelmed, you're like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to take a break. And it's kind of like, okay, even if that means me getting up from my desk, walking down the hall, getting a cup of water, taking a few deep breaths on my way back, just taking a moment to kind of regulate myself again, reset myself. You could look at it as a reset button, and then come back with like this clear mind to say, okay, let's try this again. Those are the things that I found that it does for me, and practicing it even more, I just realized that I use it more often, because I have to definitely get to a place where I'm efficient in utilizing the skills, because really, if you want to be certified in this, it's pretty extensive, the training to be a certified DBT therapist. Like I said, the skills class is great, especially for individuals who have trauma. But if you are really interested in doing the entire DBT, because there's other levels that I was telling you about, where you can do what they call a chain analysis, which I think is awesome and amazing, because that's when you have the individual client may have experienced something, and they get to sit down with their therapist and go through what happened, how are you feeling when that happened, how did you respond or react, and they kind of do this link of each set of things so that you can actually look at it all mapped out. And then you're able to pinpoint, when I feel like this, I tend to respond like this. And when I respond like this, I tend to get this result or response for individuals. And so you got like this way of really making an even more detailed plan of what things are good or healthy for me to do or not healthy for me to do.
That's incredible. It sounds like an incredible amount of self-awareness that DBT
Yes.
can come with. So I can see why, learning the skills to teach them, you are also becoming aware of yourself as well. That makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned, someone who is interested in, becoming a certified DBT therapist. What would you say to a mental health professional who is skeptical or might be skeptical about DBT or using DBT skills?
What
Like that?
Suzanne said before, check the facts. Because DBT is shown to be scientifically effective. It produces excellent results. You know, I read one of the statistical facts about individuals who this was created for, that 90% of them were able to reduce usage of medication for individuals with borderline personality, because they're committed. And like I said, it's so many different stages. So, this is one component. Can you imagine if, you're doing all of them in conjunction with your therapist, processing through it like you do, and then doing the check-ins, because there's just so many areas of accountability that the individual is learning so many things on how to utilize so many skills. They're learning collaboration through the whole process as well. So it's strengthening their interpersonal skills, abilities. So I would tell any individual who is skeptical to go ahead and pull up some of the research that talks about how this is beneficial and has been beneficial for individuals that are high in self-harm or suicidal thoughts. I think even when I took my training, most of them had said they had not had anyone who had successful completion of suicide in the years that they've done this treatment. So they know that it works. We know that it works. And we're telling you how it works for us. We hear our clients even being in it for the few weeks that they have been. We're in what, week 8 now, and they're talking about how they've liked and enjoyed some of the things that this has produced for them, and they've become more self-aware. So it works.
Yeah, it sounds like when I was researching more about this topic, there were like journal article after journal article of all this research, evidence-based, showing that it does in fact help individuals from a variety of different backgrounds. And it, through speaking with you, I can definitely see that. So what would you say to a mental health professional who would like to utilize DBT in their practice, or a survivor or client that would like to use DBT in their everyday lives? Is there like somewhere that they should be pointed to, or anything that you'd like to share as far as, tips or anything like that?
The trainings are there's multiple levels of trainings. I would say start with the DBT Skills group. There's a lot of individuals who definitely start out with that's how they incorporate this into their therapy, because the skills are very beneficial. The other parts are just, some of the other components that go along with it, but you wouldn't have those other parts of doing the therapy processing or the coaching without the skills. So I would say get involved in learning these skills and get yourself on a team, because even as an individual who's doing the group, you have a collaborative team that you work with, that's to help you make sure that you are not on one extreme or the other when you're utilizing the skills. So I would tell them to definitely take that first introductory training on the skills, and training number 2, which would be about the skills group itself, and start from there.
Yeah, I would add, get trained, like Monique said, and implement the DBT program the way it's designed. It's very formulaic, systematic. And so wavering off of it, I think, will not produce the results that you're hoping for. Knowing how it's designed and working it the way it's meant to be worked.
Yeah, it sounds like you should do it to completion if possible, if you're starting with
Yes.
skills, to kind of see the result first and then decide if it's right for you, is what it sounds like.
Yes, definitely. It sounds weird to just say, like, there's like just generally seem like generalized skills once you start to really implement them. They're just like skills that everyone should have. It's kind of how you begin to feel when you're doing it. And then some of us may realize there are skills that we're already using, when you start to think about it, when you start to think about when a situation occurs, how often have you recognized that you've stopped and you've taken a moment to take a breather and to observe before you proceed it forward? Or how often have you taken a moment and really practiced a mindfulness exercise? I think that in life, if we think about it, we've probably all had moments where we've stepped outside and held our face up to the sun and closed our eyes and took a couple of deep breaths in and enjoyed that moment in the sunlight and thought about how beautiful nature was. And that is as simple as a mindfulness exercise right there. It's being aware of the moment you're in, to take your mind off whatever was distressing you prior to that. So I think some of these skills, when you think about them, are skills that we actually practice on a day-to-day basis. We just didn't know that they were labeled like this.
Yeah, it's like the intention now, like adding that and acknowledging it is really where you're starting to see, oh, I do have kind of this power to regulate.
Yes. And it's
Right.
interesting to even have some of the clients come back and say, I didn't think I was practicing that. But when they start talking to you, you are able to like point that out to them, that you did such and such. And it shows that you were practicing radical acceptance in that moment.
And
And you're
celebrate
like,
those
wow,
moments.
yes.
That's so important. Celebrate, like,
Yes.
girl, you did it. You weren't doing it a week ago, but you're doing it now.
Yes. It's wonderful to hear the clients come back and say that.
Yeah, I was going to say it must be really rewarding for you both when you see the growth within your clients within just a few weeks of doing this.
Yeah.
It's incredible. We talked a lot about how DBT can pair with other things. So you mentioned other therapies. Are there other self-care activities or mindfulness exercises that you'd like to uplift or share that might pair nicely with these DBT skills that you were mentioning?
Well, I love me a good body scan, which is a mindfulness activity that DBT even just says, but trauma oftentimes is trapped in our bodies and we become numb to it. So body scans will help a person just become aware of sensations in their bodies. Sensations are different than emotions and feelings. They're the physical energy that shows up in their body. So being able to become aware when they're tense or in pain, and then helping a person to become aware of those sensations, then they can really become aware of their emotions. So it's kind of a scaffolding effect that a body scan really helps. And I think it particularly is helpful when you're working with trauma survivors, because they shut down a lot. They shut down sensations and feelings a lot of times. And who can blame them? It makes logical sense to shut these parts of ourselves down when they've been hurt traumatically like they have been.
Yeah, it's a very normal reaction to feel numb after trauma. Absolutely. Monique, is there anything else that you wanted to say or piggyback off of that?
Yes, I would say I am one who loves to take the emotional vacation. So there is a mindfulness exercise where you can like imagine yourself on vacation. Picture yourself, lying on a beach in the sunlight, whether you're in a hammock, there's an amazing breeze blowing, just feel the breeze. I love those types of mindfulness moments. So relaxing, just immersing yourself in that moment of distraction, not necessarily trying to avoid it, but getting in a place where, I'm now calm enough to be able to go back and think about my situation that I have afterwards. But I definitely love the mindful vacation.
I think I love the mindful vacation too. That sounded awesome.
Yes, because it really like tells you to really like experience it, so you're like thinking about the sand or thinking about when you walk on a beach. If you've ever went, if imagine your toes in the sand, how that feels when you're walking towards the water, hearing the waves as they come in and they rush back out, hearing the seagulls, as they're squawking about, what does that sunlight feel like on you when you're laying out in the sun relaxing? Just it's such a relaxing thing. And it takes a lot of your focus because you're really trying to take yourself there mentally. And it kind of brings this sense of calm to you when you do it. It's a mental vacation. I love it.
I love it too. And I think that that's a wonderful place to sign off because I think I'm going to have to explore this more right after this call. That was incredible. Before I do, though, is there anything else that you'd like to add in regards to DBT that we may have not covered?
I would say you owe it to yourself to take power of your mental health, to heal, and to learn ways to love yourself. Go to Psychology Today and find a therapist in your area that implements DBT. Or at the very least, get a good book like DBT Skills Workbook for PTSD to begin learning the skills, or listen to other podcasts like DBT and Me to learn more about DBT. Teach these skills to the children in your life so that they can become empowered in their present lives and in their future lives. So you owe it to yourself.
I love that, Suzanne. Monique, is there anything you'd like to say?
No, not really. I just totally agree with everything she says. You owe it to yourself to take back that power that you feel like was taken from you, and be empowered with the skills to know that you can have that life worth living that you once really fully believed you had before. And if not, experience it. experience something new. Take the chance and see if it works.
Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful place to sign off. So thank you for listening to the Victim Service Center podcast. The VSC is a nonprofit organization that provides free confidential counseling services for victims of any kind of trauma in Central Florida. To learn more about our services, please visit victimservicecenter.org. And to everyone listening, healing is not linear and you are not alone. And thank you so much, Suzanne and Monique, for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having us once again.